All right, ladies, it's laundry day. Time to clean up all these messes that have been made over the weekend. In international politics, we have a double feature, you could say, between the mess in Ukraine and the mess in Taiwan, both of which were largely created, well, I don't know if I want to say created, but let's say agitated by the Biden administration. These were both problems that didn't necessarily need to turn into conflicts, but have escalated significantly, let's say, in the time since Biden became president. I guess we'll start with Ukraine. Ukraine's latest counteroffensive that promised to retake the lost territories from the Ruskies, perhaps cut off the land bridge, also known as a road, between Russia and Crimea, or perhaps, as some in the betting markets were actually putting money on, Ukraine might retake Crimea during this counteroffensive. Well, it turns out the counteroffensive is already over. It's been a massive failure. And the Kiev Independent, of all outlets, is reporting that Ukraine may pause the big spring offensive. Guess what, folks? If the Kiev Independent is saying that Ukraine may pause their spring offensive, if they're even hinting at that, it's over. It's done. If they were thinking about pausing the spring offensive, guess what? Kiev Independent would say everything's going great. Nothing is amiss. The offensive is going stronger than ever. That would be the narrative coming out of the Kiev Independent. If the Kiev Independent is going so far as to say, there's a chance this counteroffensive may be over, guess what? It's done. What did that last? 2-3 weeks? And from what we're told, they kept telling us the offensive hadn't actually started, because each time that Ukraine launched an attack and got routed by the Ruskies, we were told, oh, this was just a probe. They were just probing. The Ukrainians, they weren't serious. They weren't launching full-scale attack. They were not trying to retake that town. They were just prodding at the Ruskies, looking for a weak spot, looking for a blind spot of the Ruskies. And the Ruskies, would come and say, hey, not so fast, Ukrainians. And Ukraine would put their hands back up and say, whoa, bro, I was just probing you. This isn't an attack. Don't go nuts. Don't act like you're the winner. I was just testing you. And so they've been doing that for 3 weeks. But now they're saying that they're going to pause the offensive. I guess that means that we're in the offensive. That actually was the offensive the whole time, and these weren't just probes. It sounds like they actually have been on the offensive and losing for a few weeks. And perhaps they've gotten tired of that and said, you know what? This offense stuff is overrated. We need to go back on defense. And when you go back on defense, when you go from offense to defense, what that tends to be a sign of, it's a sign that you're losing bigly. You're losing so much by trying to put yourself out there and go on the defensive. You have to put your shields up and say, you know what? No, we need to stem our losses. We're still going to take losses, but we need to stop losing as much equipment and men as we are currently losing, or else we will be defeated in short order. Oh, you know what? I just realized there was a third story, a second Ukraine story, but a third story overall that I should be covering today, but I forgot to look into. I saw a picture of Putin holding up a sheet of paper, and the caption that I've read was that Putin apparently has revealed, I don't know if he's published the full thing, or if he just held it up as a sheet of paper on camera and said, hey, look, here it is, but I'm not going to let you read it. The proposed treaty that had been tentatively agreed to by Ukraine and Russia back in March of 2020, before Boris Johnson intervened on behalf of Washington to put the kibosh on peace and order Ukraine and tell them, you absolutely cannot end this war. You cannot sign a peace deal with Russia. I, Boris Johnson, command you to keep fighting. We all remember that situation. It was a terrible, terrible time. I personally was infuriated that the British and the Americans would go so far as to stop a war from ending, a war that was about to end. That would have been over quick. It would have been, at that point, just a month-long war. And Boris got on a plane, flew to Kiev, and said, you will absolutely not sign a peace deal. And instead now, we've had this war for a year and a half, and hundreds of thousands of people are dead. Largely because of Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson and his gosh, what would you call them? His co-conspirators. They could, by doing nothing, have allowed this war to end and saved countless lives. But instead, they intervened, they opened their big fat mouths, and they threatened Ukraine and said, no, 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 no. You're not going to have peace. You will have war until we've decided you've had enough war. And if you listen to the American military talk about their goals in this war, their goal is just to inflict pain on Russia. Well, guess what? As long as the war goes on, they'll be inflicting pain on Russia to some extent. Now, they'll be inflicting a lot more pain on Ukraine, but Russia, you know, every time a Russian soldier dies or Russia loses some equipment, yeah, that's bad for Russia. So, as far as the U.S. military is concerned, this war should be fought to the last Ukrainian. As long as they can keep it going, that's good, because it will cost the Russians resources. Yes, it will cost us a lot more. It will cost Ukraine everything. But as long as it costs Russia something for this war to go on, the U.S. supports continuing the war. And that's what Putin allegedly, although I haven't had, like I said, I haven't had time to look into the story, but that was just the headline I saw, which is why I should have made this the big headline for today, but I forgot about it because there's so much else going on. Anyway, he talked about that publicly, it would seem. So, nice to have that confirmation, I guess. Now, as far as confirmation from the American side, we won't get that until, I guess, decades from now, when the CIA archives are opened, you know, like the Stasi, when the Berlin Wall fell and everyone was able to open up their Stasi file and they all found out who was spying on them. It's going to take that kind of an event for us to learn, you know, stuff like, hey, who killed JFK? Wink, wink. We all know who. Why is the Ukraine war gone on for as long as it has? You know, we know why. But to get confirmation from the American side, Washington will have to be defeated. There's no other way to put it. The current regime will have to collapse in a manner reminiscent of the German Democratic Republic. Now, moving on to the big story of the day, perhaps the most important development of, you know, that we've had in a long time in American foreign policy. Antony Blinken, the current U.S. Secretary of State, the soy boy in chief, went over to China. He kissed the ring, and he proclaimed that the United States does not support Taiwanese independence. They do not see Taiwan as an independent country. They do not think that Taiwan should become an independent country. And while I'm emotionally and personally sympathetic towards the cause of Taiwan, I put my country first. And I understand that, you know, global thermonuclear war is a cost that is too high to stand on principle and defend the right of Taiwan to self-determination. And so I do not want my government grandstanding, going to China and talking about how, you know, from the river to the sea, Taiwan must be free. Or I guess if you're going to adapt that little saying to Taiwan, it would be from the Straits to the Pacific, but you catch my drift. And so this directly counters what Joe Biden himself said, as his administration often does. Joe Biden, when asked directly, you know, hey, would you militarily intervene to protect Taiwan, you know, if it was attacked by China? And Joe Biden said, well, yeah, of course we would. Why wouldn't we do that? Taiwan's our friends. I mean, it would be terrible if China attacked them. I mean, yes, in principle and, you know, emotionally, a very surface level, yes, I agree, Mr. President. You know, that would be a, you know, a noble thing to do. But China has nukes. They're a very big country. They've got more soldiers, I think, than anyone on Earth. Well, maybe North Korea, because I think North Korea just basically counts their entire population as a part of their military. So if you look at like official standing army statistics, I think North Korea has more, a bigger army than anyone in the world. But China probably has, as far as actual trained soldiers, has the most in the world. And Americans like to make fun of them and go, oh, come on, China's a joke. We could easily take them. China they don't have aircraft carriers. They have like, what, 2? And one of them was built by the Soviet Union. It runs on diesel fuel. And it's like, why would China need aircraft carriers? They're not an empire. China's not trying to go fight a war and invade the United States. China's military is meant to defend China and keep the U.S. out of China's immediate area. That's what China's military is built to do. So China's military, perfectly capable of occupying an island off their coast. That's what Taiwan is. Taiwan is a small island state that is next to a very, very big mainland Asian power known as China. And even though China really hasn't, if you want to count the 3 years or 4 years, was it, from 1945 to 1949, when technically, the Republic of China, which is the current Taiwanese government, when it was the mainland government of China and it controlled both mainland China and Taiwan, if you want to count that as, that was, Taiwan was a part of China, and it's like, okay, it was like, that was 4 years. If you take those 4 years out from 1945 to 1949, Taiwan has not been a part of China since 1897, I think. I believe that's when Japan first conquered Taiwan. And in fact, there's some old people in Taiwan, who still consider themselves more Japanese, certainly, than Chinese or Taiwanese. Though I think that contingent is pretty much almost all gone. But, for a while there, for not quite as long as it's been separate now, but, for a good 50 years, almost, Taiwan was Japanese, not Chinese. And since then, they've been certainly, they speak Chinese, they call themselves the Republic of China. They're certainly more Chinese than anything else, but they consider themselves distinct from the mainland Chinese government to a large degree. That's not everyone. There is, from what I understand, a very vocal minority of people in Taiwan who would like to be part of mainland China and would rather be unified with that country. But they don't currently control the government. They are not the majority, it would seem. But no matter whether they are or they aren't, it's none of our business. We risk everything by getting involved in their conflict over there in the Pacific. It was bad enough trying to take on Japan in the Pacific back in World War II when Japan didn't have nukes. But trying to take in China, when China does have nukes, that's just suicide. And so, even though I don't see the Biden administration or Washington in general having any consistent position, I hope that this stays the position, that they pivot away from this idea that we're going to defend Taiwan, even though clearly that's the next thing that they want to do. That's the next big military-industrial complex grift after Ukraine. The military-industrial complex just is pushing us too close to nuclear war. And nobody cares. We're so much closer to nuclear war now than we ever were over the course of the actual Cold War. It really is just sad. So, anyway, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.